So now we've got an opportunity to meet with some people who have got cross-border education executive leadership experience. So we're going to meet Ravneet Pawha. He's currently the Global Deputy Vice Chancellor and CEO of South Asia at Deakin University and President of the Australia-India Business Council. Ravneet set up the Deakin University office in 1994. The first ever international university office in India of any foreign education provider. Her awards include the prestigious Business Leader of the Year in the India Australia Business and Community Awards 2018, as well as the Exceptional Woman of Excellence Award in the World Economic Forum 2019. We're also going to be joined by Warwick Freeland. Warwick is the Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director of IELTS at IDP, which is an ASX-listed education provider. IDP is the world's largest student placement business with offices in 30 countries, including an incredibly large presence in India. IDP co-owns the IELTS English language test and runs the English language schools. Warwick is a Victorian EdTech expert with strong understanding of the Indian ecosystem through IDP's India office. Hi Warwick, how are you?
Good, David. Hi everyone.
Nice to see you. You're based in Melbourne right at the moment, right?
I am based in Melbourne, as confusing as it is from our current circumstance, but yeah, absolutely, back in the office now.
And we're going to have Ravneet come and join us in a minute as well. So maybe whilst we're waiting for Ravneet to come, maybe you can give us a bit of an introduction to IDP and the work that you guys do, and then we'll talk a little bit about your role.
Sure, no problems. Look, IDP's had a long history since 1995 in India. And so it's been a fantastic story for the organisation, and it's grown from virtually nothing up to we have approximately 2,000 staff based in India now. It really is an engine of our company's success. And from a technology perspective, when I joined IDP about 13 years ago, we had 2 people providing kind of technology support in India, and we now have a hub with some 500 people based there. And so, as you explained, David, we're a large student placement organisation. We also run IELTS globally around the world in well over 1,000 locations in some 55 countries. And we're connected to approximately 1,000 universities around the world. And so, we've got a large digital presence, probably have 100 million visits to our websites every year. And so it's great to be here, and as I said, India is a very important part of IDP, and an important part of our success. So
fantastic. Well, Ravneet's still logging into the system, so you and I might begin a conversation, and then Ravneet will join us in a minute. I'll hear through my producer that she's into the room in a second or two. I wanted to go back and just think a little bit about IDP, right? So IDP has a couple of, I think actually Australian universities were heavily involved in the establishment of IDP, right?
Correct. Go back 50-something years ago. It was all Australian universities. It's then been through a bit of a journey where an organisation called SEEK bought half of it. It's still the universities involved, and currently on the Australian Stock Exchange, we've got a valuation in Australian dollars of about $5 billion, and Australia's universities own half. So they've done pretty well.
Fantastic. It's been a fantastic partnership, which is a great thing to talk about partnership between education providers and EdTech companies.
Yeah, well,
so if we think about this, and so let's turn our attention to thinking about using technology to drive innovation, right? IDP is a fantastic case study of that, right? Obviously, that's a great case study of being able to digitize and do all sorts of things. Obviously started in pen and paper, and you guys have been building some digital tools recently as well. What are the innovations you're seeing around English language learning and English language acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a really dynamic space. I mean, one thing that's clear from a COVID environment is that a lot of things that I would have guessed would happen in about 5 years' time have actually come forward. And so therefore, that actually provides enormous opportunities for the EdTech sector to participate in new ways that they never could before. And so we're seeing lots of advances, that are impacting actually English language testing in the future, but also the whole industry that we occupy in terms of the student recruitment or student placement industry, where like the use of virtual events, virtual counselling, and all sorts of other virtual services, which is really where EdTech has a strong place to play, because you don't need that physical footprint which is traditionally what a lot of businesses have lived on, you can actually participate in a different way. And so through our digital campus, as I mentioned, there's about 500 people. We have, developing software, websites, doing testing and customer care.
This is in India?
In India, 500 people based in Chennai. And so for us, it's just a fantastic story. And I mean, we go to India because of the talent that's there, and that's a key driver behind it. And so, it's a great talent market. It's also a great market to operate in. But it's also a way of us, to link to other organisations, because, whether it's EdTech in Australia or EdTech in India, we're keen to understand what people are doing, because there's potentially opportunity for them to join into these digital platforms that we're building.
We'll come back and talk about your presence in India in a lot more detail in a second. I want to just stay with thinking about the student experience for a second and think a little bit about the innovation that you're seeing. What sort of opportunities is this creating for students? Like, we're obviously talking about students right now who have spent the last 12 to, 18 months who've been working in an online space. I'm wondering what opportunities you're seeing around technical innovation and what opportunities it's creating.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at students, I mean, there are people, I can put them in two buckets. You've got domestic students and you've got international students. IDP's focus is particularly on international students, and there's a bit of a difference what the opportunities are. So for EdTech companies that are focused on domestic, the opportunity for short courses, whether it's, there's been an explosion of interest in MOOCs and OPMs and those sorts of ways of teaching. And then for international students, they've got this challenge now where, some of them have been studying effectively online for some 12 to 18 months. And so the way that they kind of bridge that challenge that they've had to their desire to actually connect to the institutions onshore, that's still part of the journey that they like. And it's different from country to country. I mean, I have my Australia hat on. Australia's been quite closed, but it's interesting, other countries actually have been quite open. And so therefore the opportunities for companies to look at what the needs are for an Australian-bound student versus a Canada-bound student versus a UK-bound student are actually quite different now, whereas they always used to be kind of the same. And in the US now too, with a different president that exists there now, the opportunities exist there as well. So look, I think there's opportunities both at the client end and the candidate end, and we kind of straddle both of those areas.
And there's absolutely no doubt that there's some real opportunity to create some efficiencies in those processes. I'm just hearing a conversation about, Ravneet's going to be joining us really soon, so we'll have her in a minute. I want to think about the idea, if we think about this idea in education of being able to move people from place to place, being able to help them. Obviously, technology can mean that students don't necessarily need to have that mobility. What's IDP's thinking around that?
Well, look, we're kind of, there's two aspects to that. There is still a very large proportion of students that actually want that face-to-face experience. I think they're a bit frustrated at the moment because they haven't been able to go on that journey. But the whole nature of learning is changing now. Whereas historically, it used to be you'd do a degree or some qualification and then you'd work for the rest of your life. Whereas it's changing now where you actually end up doing a lot more micro-credentialing and micro-learning. And so therefore, that's an opportunity, for example, for IDP in the future to actually think about, well, how do we participate not only in the full courses, but also in the short courses as well.
Fantastic, Warwick. Thanks very much. Okay, so let's think a little bit about, at the moment, let's think about the value proposition from Indian EdTech entrepreneurs thinking about the Australian context. And I'm wondering whether you can comment, because I know you said IDP has 500 developers in India. I'm interested in your view around why you're based there, what are the things that you're seeing, how are you seeing India as a place of innovation?
Well, I mean, it all starts with the talent. India has a very good educational system to train fantastic people, and the work ethic and everything is fabulous. So therefore, we have a very, very successful enterprise that's based there. We've only had it at that scale for probably about a year and a half now. but we invested to have a proper campus type facility, and so that's the environment that we want. But look, there's no doubt that the benefits that India has are very significant, because it's a very large domestic market that Indian EdTech companies can connect to. But then they've got this kind of nexus about how do they consider actually to go additionally outside of India as well. And I know you and I have talked in the past, there's quite a difference between like China and India. They are the two most exciting countries in the world, whereas there's a very different dynamic that occurs there. In China now, you've got a market where typically Chinese companies they don't actually operate outside China. The market's so big that they're quite inwardly focused, and they develop products and services that are very much focused on the Chinese student. And therefore, a lot of them aren't scalable businesses outside of China. So I think part of the challenge for the Indian, they've got a fantastic domestic market to target, but then they've also got to design products that will work in markets outside India as well. But it's just, if I could pick any country in the world to actually be connected to from an EdTech perspective, I think India would be number one, absolutely.
There's absolutely no doubt. We're going to be hearing later in this India Innovation Exchange, we're going to be hearing from Josh Nestor at Seek, who you mentioned before. And in fact, I was doing a prep call with him a couple of days ago, and he was talking also about the opportunity and comparing between India and China. So coming back to the idea of being based there, I think you sort of mentioned, if I'm right, you've got great, capable people coming out of there. Are you starting to see solutions that are of interest to you? Are you starting to see product coming from India that you're thinking this is interesting, or resources and support services?
I think we're looking forward to seeing more of that. I think, we've been pretty inwardly focused in terms of providing, capabilities for our own organisation, and it's been a great engine for that. I mean, we've needed that in terms of to run like virtual events and virtual counselling. Like all of our staff in our student placement offices in India at the moment are working from home. We're very conscious of the challenges that they have, but just to be able to do that, and then we've run hundreds of events for institutions virtually. And so therefore that's been, without our Indian hub, we would not have been able to do that. And so it's been a great enabler for us. But we're very interested in effectively the ecosystem that exists around what we do. And I think, areas that, we're interested in is careers, direction, any sort of EdTech or apps that are connected to the career that a student might want to go on. There's something we'd love to bolt on to the side of what we do. The students have particular travel needs, accommodation needs, lots of things. If they're on an international journey, we're interested in that. And the other area is actually in the English language learning side of things, because of our IELTS business, which it's a very large scale business. We have very huge points of presence around the world, and so therefore anything connected with preparation for English language learning or other forms of online learning in that area is of high interest to us.
Fair enough. And if we think about India for a moment, one of the things that's really interesting is, and we've just met four of these for Indian EdTech companies. And I experienced this when I went to Bangalore and Delhi in 2018, 2019. And the thing that was really interesting to me is that their solutions were fully formed, right? They were doing some really high tech things. So I'm wondering whether or not you wanted to sort of comment on some of the solutions that you're seeing out of India.
Well, I mean, there's already companies that are just world class that are there, and I mean it's like I think any EdTech and in any high tech, high growth area where you've got companies that actually are already at significant scale. So Baiju obviously is an example there, where it's just fascinating. They've obviously got tremendous capitalisation as an organisation. They've just raised more capital, and they've actually and a stated mission now of actually embarking on the world. In April, they announced that they had, they're providing their tutoring service on a global scale. And so that's an example of an Indian EdTech business that's actually now breaking out of the limitations of India to go further to the world. And so, incredibly successful. India's very good at that sort of tutoring sort of industry, and they've supported companies around the world from a back office perspective but also, Baidu now is actually going on the front foot actually as providing that as a primary service. And so, other organisations there, I mean, with, the large ones like Unacademy as well. So there are some very big name brands that exist over there.
Out of India?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You've got Simple Learn is a great example. Emeritus is another fantastic example of Indian EdTech companies that are taking on an education and providers that are taking on the world in really different ways. And Baidu is a great example, which you mentioned. It sort of leads us into our next conversation and thinking for a minute. And that is, if you think about the Australian market and we think about Indian EdTech entrepreneurs providing resources into this, I'm wondering whether you want to sort of think about Victoria as sort of like a refinement market and how we can use our time zone as an advantage for Indian EdTech companies making a step into other markets.
Yeah, look, I think that's, I'll be honest, that as a logic has been around for a very long time. Rightly or wrongly, I've been around for a while now. I've been through the computer era, the electronics era, the automation era, the mobile phone era, and it's interesting, in all of those areas, and EdTech is no different. Actually Australia's and Victoria's been a very attractive place to actually do proof case for enterprises, and I think that's something that Indian EdTech businesses would have to experience, because it's just, the market in India is very different, like the China example I gave, to other markets, and therefore you've got to find a market that actually is similar to the US and Canada and other places, and the UK, which are actually a great markets. But for a business to just kind of step into the US, and I mean, we've been to the ASU GSV in San Diego, where you've got businesses there that are spruiking themselves, and I think the next one of those is on in August. But wish I could go. But to tackle the US, as your first entry market, I just think is overly ambitious. I think to actually use Australia as a test case, and to learn how to adapt products to suit the particular educational system that's pretty common in a lot of those markets, it would make Victoria very, very attractive. And we just need to look at other organisations like McDonald's that have typically used Australia as the test bed for everything from McCafe to anything else that they launch, because they just know, well, let's try it there. If we can make it a success in Australia, then chances are it's probably going to work in the US and other markets at a lower cost than trying to penetrate the US, which is just such a beast. You kind of almost don't know where to go. But obviously the best market in the world to go to when you eventually are ready for it. But boy, you've got to be careful to blow a lot of money if you want to go in that direction. So I think Victoria would be a great place to test and refine EdTech concepts.
I think that's a really good point, and that is, I think if we just pause for a minute and think about the refinement, and you make a really valid point, and that is, the reality is, if you're an Indian EdTech entrepreneur and you're going to start beginning your export market, there is a fantastic opportunity in this space to be able to come to Australia. You can refine your product here, because let's just do some little statistics for EdTech entrepreneurs that are joining us from India today. 40 universities, they're all big, they're all really big customers, they'll test your product, they'll all make it work. The school system has these fantastic opportunities to be able to scale, to deploy your product into large suburban schools, into big regional schools, and then the smallest rural schools. So if you can deploy to that network, you can deploy to anywhere. So it's a great opportunity to set a step up here. You can test your market, your positioning. You can test how you go to market. You can refine your business go-to-market model, and there's great support services as well. I'm hearing from my control room that actually we've got Ravneet now. So this is a fantastic way to segue in, and let me see if we've got Ravneet. We do. Ravneet, how are you?
Hi, how are you, David? My apologies. I just had some trouble trying to log in, so I am sorry.
You joined us at the perfect time, because I was about to give the fantastic story of Deakin, Deakin Co and NASCOM working together in partnership. So this is the perfect example for, Warwick and I have just been talking about Indian companies setting up in Victoria and going offshore. And now this is a perfect opportunity for you to say, wait a sec, we can also help going back the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the interesting story with NASCOM, I mean, it's not a very old story. It just started, I would say, a couple of months back. And we started thinking about how do we go forward where we can offer some of our programs onto the Indian corporate sector from a B2B and a B2C perspective. So we got approached and discussed it with NASCOM, and it worked out. So we now currently are the largest provider from a university perspective, including all Indian universities as well, for NASCOM to provide short courses. I think as we speak, we have more than 3,000 enrollments.
So this is Deakin curriculum being delivered on an Indian learning management system at NASCOM, yeah?
That's right. Deakin curriculum through Deakin Co being delivered on NASCOM platform, which is an Indian platform and has access to B2B and B2C platform with about 13,000 enrollments already taken up.
Fantastic. And that's a really, again, a nice segue to return back to an earlier topic that Warwick and I were talking about, which was thinking about the capabilities of the Indian market that you sit. You sit in a unique place, Ravneet. You sit, obviously, you're based in India, you're working with an incredibly large, well-respected university. So I'm interested in what you're seeing in the Indian market for Australian education providers to think about.
Well, I think India, in the education sector, I would say that the Indian EdTech space is at a threshold of revolution, almost a strong revolution, because the pandemic has forced us to do that at the moment. You know, even the UGC requirements today, which is the University Grant Commission, today, you know, yesterday approved that all 40% of the curriculum everywhere can be taught online. Now, this is a very first of its kind for India. And I think that this is a game changer for the education sector and the EdTech sector, both domestically and internationally. So Indian companies are really looking to be innovative. They are looking at scalability. They are looking at solutions. And what would be really interesting would be to see models of engagement with Australian providers. And I think that India is a great tech hub, but it does need an end-to-end solution offer, you know, a highly sophisticated end-to-end solution offer, which I think can be in collaboration with the Australian EdTech companies. Currently, you know, there are about 435 new EdTech startups that have started in the last 24 months alone in India. And that's the kind of space you are looking at. KPMG report actually tells us that the industry value in 2021 will be close to $2 billion US dollars of the EdTech sector. So it's a huge sector. And because of the sheer size of the market and models that are scalable, well-priced, tech-savvy, you know, and catering to the needs of the Indian or the international market, I think it's a sweet spot for EdTech companies to come together, both from Australia and India.
We'll come back to that in a second. I just wanted to pick up something that you said and bounce it off Warwick as well, and that is, I think if I understood what you said, Ravneet, the University Grant Commission have now said that 40% of tuition of instruction can be online.
Yeah.
Which is a change in India. Are you seeing that in other markets, Warwick? Are you seeing that the pandemic has driven sort of digital transformation that you hadn't seen before, you may not have seen before?
Oh, look, there's no doubt. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think I think things have been brought forward 5 years, and so therefore, I mean, the balance is going to be, you know, the pandemic has created a really interesting dynamic. But I think people still like the face-to-face learning because it's kind of that bonding and the experience and all those sorts of things. But you can't do it at the moment, and so there's no doubt that there has been a change in the way people are learning. People, you know, it's now a Zoom generation, whether you know we thought there would be or not, but people are absolutely to learning in that way now. And that's inevitable that things are going to keep progressing. And I think, particularly in the area of that micro-credentialing area, that's just going to be the standard way of doing things. And I think that's a very explosive area. And for people, for that upskilling in their careers and jobs, in an organisation like IDP, there's an expectation that you continue to learn. And so therefore, the way to do it, it'll be online, and you'll be expected to do a course a year or whatever it is, because the things are changing so quickly. You have to be doing it. So I think online education in that sector will just increase.
I'd agree. I agree 100%. Go, Ravneet.
I think, David, I was just going to say that I totally agree with Warwick. I think the current and the future is going to be about blended approach. I don't think 100% online will work. I do think that a blended approach will be what the future would hold. I mean, currently, maybe because of the pandemic situation, it has to be completely online. But 5 years down the line, or even 3 years down the line, I think universities and education sectors across the world will need to come up with models of engagement, with the right pedagogy, the teaching practices, focusing on digitization process, but at the same time making sure that the user experience is world class. I think teamwork by teacher and the techie members from both sides to be working together, I think, is going to be where the future will lie. And for institutions, I think a business model of high value content delivered with the right technology and in real time is going to be the essence, I think. And education where you want, when you want, in the style you want, in the modules that you want, is going to be where the future will be.
Yeah, I agree. And coming back to the point that Warwick was making before as well, yeah, you're right. There's going to be, there will be a desire to have some face-to-face. And there was a really interesting statistic that I saw from Professor Shirley Alexander from UTS a few months ago. She did a presentation with us focused on China, and she shared some data about student engagement, and the lecture, even online, had dropped. Yeah. The participation face-to-face over the last years have been dropping, but online it's dropped to almost non-existent, where workshops and seminars and practicals and things like that have really, and tutorials have really increased in participation, both online and face-to-face. So I think you're right, Ravneet, there will be some new engagement models. I want to go back to something as well, Ravneet, that we talked about in our earlier conversation, and that is one of the things that's interesting about Indian EdTech companies for non-Indian education providers is that Indian EdTech companies have to have robust technology, scalability, deliverability, because they're delivering to incredibly large numbers. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that Indian numbers are always, out of context when you're looking at the Australian context. But having said that, I mean, because I sit between the two, I have to get my head in the right space when I'm talking numbers on both ends of the world. But having said that, I think that, and also I've been a part of some of the Indian education EdTech companies' journey. For example, let me give you an example of Upgrad. Upgrad is a company that, we started talking to them before the pandemic. And we launched the program before the pandemic, knowing that this is going to be where the future is in terms of how we get together on a large-scale platform at a reasonably low-cost course, but with high value. And we picked up the market. And so clearly, David, there are two markets in India. One is the student market, right? Which is a huge number. I mean, I think it's millions of students that one can reach out. There are 200,000 schools, 35,000 colleges, and 700 universities in India. So that's the kind of scale you're looking at when you start thinking about EdTech solutions. The other big market in India is the scaling up market, the upskilling market, where people are looking at international qualification on EdTech platforms from the best of the best in the world, delivered online and in a hybrid maybe, with an Indian partner in real time with support in India. And that's what Upgrad does. So even that initiative of Deakin University with Upgrad has been extremely successful. Today we as we speak, we have close to 1,000 students in the pipeline looking at our upgrad MBA global program with Deakin and upgrad. It's a top-up program using an Indian platform, Indian support system, but the curriculum and the structure, the framework is Deakin framework, and Deakin University actually awards the degree in the end. So I think it's a combination of things like this that see the future in times to come.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I interviewed Felgen Kompali a few months ago at the Melbourne EdTech Summit, so I know a little bit about the upgrade story there. So what I'm really interested in as well, Warwick, if you think about deploying technology or using technology to drive some innovation, you've currently got a whole bunch of developers sitting in India. Are they developing for the Indian market or are they developing for your global operations?
They're developing for the global operation. I mean, there's no doubt that the Indian market, it's a very important market that makes it such a fantastic place for people to be based and to be targeting, because for us, it is a very big part of our economic engine that exists. And so therefore that's important, but they're absolutely developing our global systems, whether it be for virtual counselling or for virtual events or other forms like that. Because just tech is just so important. We basically consider ourselves a software company now, which is quite a transition for an organisation, and because it's just things move so fast. Just as a kind of a slide example to one side, like the Canadian government introduced a change to their visa, announced something, changed their visa program about 3 or 4 weeks ago, which nobody expected. That increased the traffic to our website by 100-fold. So compared to normal traffic, and so therefore and that happened so quickly. If you're not operating in that sort of digital environment, you couldn't cope. Normal systems could not cope with dealing with that amount of people, 100,000 people, that want to react with you and interact with you. And as just a funny little anecdote that you could use out of interest, is that we provide a mapping function on our website, because people want to know, for example, where they want to take a test. And so, for a great consumer feature, you provide a map. Of course you provide a map so people can see it. Well, our bill for one day for Google Maps was $12,000.
Oh, wow.
You kind of think, boy, you've got to be careful if you put a map on your website.
Yeah, the API calls. It's amazing, actually, the cost of these things at the moment as well.
Yeah,
these things are happening really quickly.
Yeah, 100-fold traffic, and it's not what you expect. But anyway, a nice surprise.
We've got about 10 minutes left. Just a reminder to anybody, if you've got any questions, you can dump them in the Q&A box and they'll appear here for us on the studio stage and we can get them asked. I wanted to really focus on two things as we finish. Firstly, I wanted to think a little bit about deploying education technology products in an Australian context and in an Indian context. And what are the things that we need to think about? So the majority of the audience today are Indian EdTech entrepreneurs and Australian educators. What are the things do you think, Ravneet, you've been straddling both of these markets for a while. What are the things that you might give as a suggestion or a point of information for Indian EdTech companies thinking about trying to deploy to a large university like the Deakin University?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is that you've really got to find the sweet spot, because say if I take the example of Deakin University, the reason why we wanted to establish a strong partnership in India in the EdTech space is because we see the future of our internationalization with India. And, we believe that it has to be with an Indian platform in real time. So the service that you provide to an international organization has to be in real time, in Indian context, with, of course, substantial support from Deakin University and Deakin systems and Deakin pedagogy and Deakin procedures. But frankly, David, if you actually start thinking about providing a service from Australia to India at the scale that it needs, at the price point that it needs, it's not going to work. So the sweet spot is, Australian pedagogy, maybe international pedagogy, international systems, but adapted to the Indian context on an Indian platform, which can be jointly nurtured, delivered, and supported. I think that is where the real opportunity, and it's not just for the student market, it is also for the corporate sector, it is also for the upskilling market, which is a huge market in India as we speak. And I think technology is the enabler here. It's bringing the mindsets together and offering that solution.
Did you want to add something there as well, Warwick, around deployment and some of the things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I suppose just look at a thought that I had too is one of the challenges for those organisations is to find the right way to kind of link to other organisations as well, because of the opportunities that exist. And you've got organisations like Deakin that are very large. You've got IDP is very large as well. And so I think part of the challenge is for them to work out how do they connect to those sorts of organisations. And I don't have a magic answer there, but I think that's probably one of the roles that that EduGrowth and similar organisations. I know I've been invited to a forum of similar forum in India as well. But I think that's the tricky part for these EdTech entrepreneurs in India, is to try to find how do you find that connection point.
It's similar to EdTech companies in Australia too, being able to find those things. So obviously, EduGrowth, Global Victorian ID, India's Didactic Association are great points of beginning with. What I will say for those Indian entrepreneurs that are with us, the one thing that you need to be incredibly careful of when thinking about deploying to Australia is that there are a couple, and we've got a session on this in a couple of weeks' time, so you'll get an opportunity to meet with some legal people and some accounting people who'll give you some structure in that. Data security is incredibly important. Data privacy is incredibly important. But the biggest one that I want to give you without all of that regulatory piece, which we'll do later in this program in a couple of weeks' time, it's really about the size of the market. Remember, as Ravneet pointed out before, the size of the Indian market. In Australia, we are talking about 40 universities, 60 or 70 TAFE institutions, 1,000 registered training organisations, 9,000 schools. So it's very quickly, you can burn the market if you don't approach it in a sophisticated way. So be very careful about how you enter the market. And what I mean by that is be conscious of the cultural differences between India and Australia in the way that we do business. And specifically, remember, it's a very small market. So if you burn through it by potentially, for example, alienating a number of universities, that may cut you out of the market. Also, in the university space specifically, the people that you want to speak to, they all know everyone else in that sector. So, they're gonna have reference calls to each other. So just be conscious of that. So that leaves us with a few.
I can answer that, David. That when we started with Upgrad, I must have had about 20 calls from various universities to talk about what the model is, how is it working.
100%.
Yeah, and it just, you're so right. That's just how this market works.
100%. There's 40 universities. There's 40 deputy vice chancellors of education. There's 40 vice chancellors. There's this is simple fact, and they've all worked with each other, for each other, been at symposia together, written research papers together. So yeah, you got to be really careful. You got to make sure that you
and I think
approach the market professionally.
The one point I'd like to leave people thinking is that at the end of the day, it is the learner experience that we have to be very cautious about.
Yeah,
whatever you're talking about, and if we can enrich the learner experience and we can well price it, I think we have a winner.
That's a nice segue for me to ask the final question that I've got from you. If we go back to our topic, which was partnerships to drive cross-border innovation, what is the biggest opportunity you're seeing from the Indian EdTech market from your seat, Warwick? Do you want to begin by giving us a bit of an idea? What do you think is the biggest opportunity you're seeing out of India?
Well, I mean, for us, we obviously are interested in things that are interesting for our business, as distinct from generic interests. And there's no doubt things that are connected to English language learning is something that we have a continuing interest in because of our IELTS business. Things that are basically services to aid international students on their journey and their career path. Things connected to that, we would be happy to have a look at. And so I suppose, to me, they're the ones that we would be interested in. But in terms of global scale, areas like tutoring, I think India does fantastically well. And I mean, Baiju is a great example of that. And I just think it's the world's capital for tutoring. And so therefore, businesses like that, I think, would only be successful, particularly if they can find particular niches to support the market there. But look, I think there's lots of opportunities. And just as a throwaway as well, David, obviously we've got the AIEC, which is the Australian International Education Conference, which is a higher ed focused conference that occurs once a year, and it'll be on again in October, and then October the next year, etc. And I mean, maybe that's something that the Indian EdTech companies might consider. I know EduGrowth's participated in the past, but that's a great way to get kind of instant exposure to the entire industry in one fell swoop. So I would throw that out there as an opportunity for them in the future.
Thanks, Warwick. And Ravneet, what about you? What do you see as the biggest opportunity for Indian EdTech companies in the Victorian context?
I think, considering that India is at its threshold, given the use of technology, given the changes in the policy, given the national education policy. So I think that there is opportunity in both the education program space to connect with Indian partners and see where we can go with that. There's also enough opportunity in the skilling space at the student level, because India really does need to upskill the student community, both from a technical as well as a human-centric skill perspective. I think there's huge potential to do that. I think that the sweet spot is again in collaborating with Indian providers. I really don't have a very strong sense of being able to operate in silos. I think it's about collaboration, and I think that an end-to-end solution going forward would be the way to go for both Indian as well as Australian providers.
Fantastic. Ravneet, thank you very much for persevering with technology and finally joining us. Warwick, thank you so very much for your participation today. It's given us a great insight into some of the opportunities both here and in India for Australia, for Victorian and Indian EdTech companies to connect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.